My fiancé's bachelorette party. Photos got posted in a group chat. I was not supposed to see photos of her at a club, sitting on another man's lap. 3 weeks before our wedding. Tonight every single story is about someone who discovered cheating in the worst possible way at the worst possible time. 5 discoveries. 5 decisions that changed everything. Let me take you back to where each of these stories started. My name is Jordan. I am 31 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and 8 months ago I discovered my fiancé's infidelity 3 weeks before our scheduled wedding, when a mutual friend accidentally added me to a group chat meant exclusively for her bachelorette party attendees, revealing photographs and messages that made clear the celebration had included far more than the innocent girls' weekend I had been told about, showing my fiancé at a club, sitting on another man's lap, along with messages between the attendees that suggested this had not been an isolated moment of poor judgment, but rather represented behavior consistent with something ongoing that several of her friends seemed to already know about. My fiancé's name is Sydney, and we had been together for 4 years, engaged for the past 14 months, with our wedding fully planned and paid for, family flying in from across the country, everything ready for what I had genuinely believed would be the beginning of our life together. I want to describe the specific moment I realized what I was actually looking at, receiving what I initially assumed was simply an errant notification from an unfamiliar group chat, opening it out of casual curiosity, only to find myself scrolling through dozens of photographs from a weekend I had been told involved simply a quiet dinner and some drinks among close friends, images instead showing an entire night at a club I had never heard mentioned, Sydney dancing closely with a man I did not recognize, and most damning, several photographs showing her seated directly on this man's lap laughing, in a manner that made unmistakably clear this was not some brief, accidental interaction but rather a sustained, comfortable physical intimacy occurring throughout what appeared to be a significant portion of the evening. I want to describe what troubled me most beyond the photographs themselves, which was the accompanying text conversation between the bachelorette party attendees, messages that referenced this same man by a casual, familiar nickname suggesting the group already knew him, with several comments implying this was not the first time Sydney had spent time with him, phrases like, "At least she's having fun before the wedding," and "Don't let this get back to Jordan," that made explicit these women understood exactly what they were witnessing represented information I was specifically not supposed to discover, and that this apparently was not a new or isolated situation but something with enough established history that her closest friends had already developed inside jokes and warnings specifically designed to keep me from ever learning about it. I want to describe the process of confronting Sydney with what I had seen, a conversation I did not rush into immediately, instead spending several hours reviewing every message and photograph carefully, documenting everything through screenshots before Sydney or her friends had any opportunity to realize I had accidentally gained access to information clearly never intended for me. When I finally showed Sydney what I had found, her reaction moved rapidly from initial shock at being caught to increasingly desperate attempts at explanation, first claiming the photograph showed nothing more than innocent, exaggerated party behavior, then, once I specifically referenced the group chat messages revealing her friend's clear awareness that this represented something requiring active concealment from me, shifting toward a more complete, if still incomplete, acknowledgement that she had indeed developed some kind of ongoing connection with this man that extended beyond the single bachelorette party weekend I had accidentally discovered evidence of. Update 4 months later. I called off our wedding within 24 hours of this discovery, a decision that required navigating the immediate, painful logistics of contacting over 150 guests, some of whom were already traveling, alongside the considerable financial complications of canceling vendors and venues on extremely short notice, complications my family helped me manage during what remains one of the most difficult periods of my adult life. Sydney's full explanation, once she stopped attempting to minimize the situation, revealed that her connection with this man had actually begun approximately 6 months before our wedding date, developing initially through what she described as innocent professional networking before evolving into something considerably more significant that she claimed she had genuinely intended to end before our wedding but had apparently been unable to actually stop, continuing even through what should have been her final unmarried celebration with her closest friends. I have had no contact with Sydney since our final conversation regarding the wedding cancellation, and I continue working through both the immediate practical complications this discovery created alongside the deeper process of understanding how completely I had misunderstood the actual state of a relationship I had believed was building toward a genuine, lasting marriage rather than one that apparently included this kind of sustained, actively concealed infidelity during what should have been our most committed, celebratory period together. Jordan discovered everything 3 weeks before walking down the aisle, and just like that group chat revealed months of concealment. The woman in story 2 discovered her own betrayal through something that had been happening for years, hidden in a place she checked every single day. Wait, this is the part that gets me most. Here is what she found. My name is Rebecca. I am 39 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and 10 months ago I discovered my husband's 3-year affair through a series of hidden financial accounts I found while preparing our joint tax documents, uncovering a pattern of transfers to accounts I had never known existed, funded through a portion of his income. He had apparently been systematically diverting away from our shared household finances specifically to support an ongoing relationship I had absolutely no previous suspicion of. My husband's name is Christopher, and we had been married for 14 years, and I want to describe the specific process of this discovery, because I was completing what I believed would be routine annual tax preparation, requesting complete documentation of Christopher's income from his employer to ensure accuracy, discovering, when comparing this official income documentation against what actually appeared in our joint household accounts, a consistent gap of several $1,000s monthly that I could not account for through any legitimate household expense or shared financial obligation I was aware of. I want to describe what I did once I identified this financial discrepancy, because rather than immediately confronting Christopher based on what could theoretically have some innocent explanation, I spent several weeks quietly investigating further, eventually discovering, through careful review of banking records I had legitimate access to as his spouse, a separate account Christopher had established using a slightly modified version of his name, an account that received regular transfers from his primary income before it ever reached our joint household finances, funds that, once I traced their subsequent use, revealed a consistent pattern of payments to a rental property in a different part of the city, along with various other expenses that painted an unmistakable picture of an entirely separate life being maintained parallel to our own shared household and marriage. I want to describe the specific moment I understood the full scope of what this represented, finding, among the transactions from this hidden account, a pattern of regular payments and gifts that traced back to a woman named Amanda, someone Christopher had apparently been in an ongoing, financially supported relationship with for slightly over 3 years, a relationship substantial enough that he had been maintaining an entirely separate residence for her, funded through money he had been systematically diverting from what I had believed was our shared, transparent household financial partnership throughout this entire period. I want to describe the confrontation that followed once I had gathered comprehensive documentation of this 3-year pattern, presenting Christopher with detailed records of every hidden transaction, watching him move through initial attempted denial before the sheer comprehensiveness of what I had documented made continued deception genuinely impossible to sustain. Update. 4 months later, I filed for divorce immediately following this confrontation, and our divorce proceedings have become considerably more complex than a typical separation given the extensive financial investigation required to fully account for 3 years of hidden asset diversion, work my attorney has described as revealing an even more comprehensive pattern of financial deception than I initially discovered, ultimately identifying that Christopher had diverted well over $100,000 across this 3-year period specifically to fund his separate relationship and residence with Amanda. This financial complexity has meant our divorce settlement negotiations have taken considerably longer than either of us likely anticipated, with my attorney successfully arguing that this diverted marital income should be properly accounted for and returned as part of our overall asset division, a legal process that remains ongoing as both sides work through the full accounting of exactly what was hidden and diverted throughout this multi-year period. I have found myself, in the months since this discovery, developing considerably more comprehensive personal financial literacy and independent account management than I previously maintained, having learned, painfully, the specific vulnerability of trusting shared household finances entirely without maintaining my own independent oversight and understanding of our actual complete financial picture. Rebecca found 3 years hidden in financial paperwork. Our third story tonight is about a discovery that came through something far more immediate. A single phone call that was never meant to reach her at all. This is the part that stays with me. Here is what happened. My name is Stephanie. I am 36 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and 7 months ago I discovered my husband's affair when his phone, which I had picked up simply to silence what I assumed was a routine notification, received an incoming call I answered without checking the caller identification. A call from a woman who, believing she was speaking with my husband himself, began an intimate conversation before either of us realized she was actually speaking to me instead. My husband's name is Marcus, and we had been married for 10 years, and I want to describe the specific circumstances of this discovery, because it happened during an entirely ordinary evening at home. Marcus in the shower while his phone buzzed repeatedly on our kitchen counter, prompting me to pick it up simply to see whether the call seemed urgent enough to interrupt his shower, answering it under the reasonable assumption that whoever was calling would immediately identify themselves once I said hello. I want to describe what happened when I answered, because the woman on the other end, clearly believing she had reached Marcus directly based on some assumption about caller identification or expectation of who would answer his personal phone, began speaking immediately in a tone and with content that made unmistakably clear within the first several sentences that this represented an ongoing, intimate relationship rather than any professional or platonic connection, referencing plans for an upcoming visit, expressing affection in terms that left no ambiguity about the nature of their relationship, continuing for nearly 30 full seconds before something in my own silence apparently prompted her to ask directly who she was actually speaking with, a question that led to one of the most surreal, disorienting moments of my adult life as I confirmed I was actually Marcus's wife rather than Marcus himself. I want to describe what followed this call because the woman, once she understood the situation, appeared genuinely mortified, quickly ending the call, while I stood in my kitchen holding my husband's phone, having just directly overheard in real time, unmistakable evidence of an affair I had no previous suspicion of throughout our entire 10-year marriage. I want to describe the specific moment Marcus emerged from his shower, finding me still standing exactly where I had been when the call ended, his phone still in my hand, understanding immediately from my expression that something significant had occurred during his brief absence. Update 4 months later. Marcus's affair, once he acknowledged what I had directly overheard, had been ongoing for approximately 8 months with a woman he had met through work-related travel, a relationship he characterized, once forced into honesty, as having developed into something considerably more serious than any brief or casual encounter, including the specific upcoming visit the woman had referenced during that accidentally overheard phone call. I filed for divorce within the following weeks, finding the specific manner of this discovery, directly hearing intimate details of the affair in Marcus's own absence rather than through any indirect evidence or confession, made any attempt at continued denial or minimization on his part essentially impossible from the very beginning of our confrontation. Our divorce was finalized just 2 months ago, and I have found myself reflecting often on the specific, almost impossible randomness of this discovery, understanding that had I simply let that call go to voicemail as I might have on any other ordinary evening, this affair might have continued for considerably longer before any other evidence eventually surfaced to reveal what Marcus had apparently been successfully concealing throughout 8 months of what I had believed remained a stable, faithful marriage. Stephanie heard everything, in real time by pure accident. Our fourth story tonight is about a discovery that came through. Something far more calculated. A test that someone else had specifically designed to reveal a truth that had been suspected, but never proven. Wait, let that sink in. Here is what happened. My name is David. I am 43 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, and 9 months ago, after several months of growing suspicion based on subtle behavioral changes I could not initially articulate specifically, I set up a deliberate test involving a fabricated business trip I actually did not take, instead remaining secretly in town to observe whether my wife's behavior during my supposed absence would reveal anything concerning, a test that confirmed suspicions I had been carrying but ultimately revealed a situation considerably more established and serious than I had initially feared. My wife's name is Jennifer, and we had been married for 12 years, and I want to describe the specific suspicions that led me toward this deliberate test. Months of subtle changes including increased phone privacy, several unexplained evening absences she attributed to work obligations that felt somehow inconsistent with what I understood of her actual job responsibilities, and a general emotional distance that had developed gradually enough that I had initially attributed it to normal marital fluctuation rather than anything requiring active investigation. I want to describe the specific test I designed, informing Jennifer I would be traveling for a 3-day business conference in a different state, while actually staying in a hotel across town, monitoring, through a combination of checking in periodically with close friends who lived nearby and eventually, on the second evening, driving past our own house directly, discovering a vehicle in our driveway I did not recognize, parked in a way suggesting an extended visit rather than any brief, innocent stop. I want to describe what I did upon this discovery, choosing not to immediately confront the situation directly but instead continuing to observe from a discreet distance, watching this same vehicle remain parked at our house throughout the following morning, confirming what I had suspected represented an overnight stay rather than any brief, easily explainable visit. I want to describe the moment I finally confronted the situation directly, returning home earlier than my supposed business trip should have concluded, finding Jennifer with a man I did not recognize, both clearly caught completely off guard by my unexpected early return, a confrontation that revealed, through Jennifer's shocked, unprepared explanations, that this represented not any isolated incident but rather an ongoing relationship that had apparently been developing for approximately 5 months, considerably longer and more established than my original suspicions had led me to fear. Update 4 months later. Jennifer's affair, once fully revealed through subsequent conversations, involved a man she had met through a fitness class she had joined ostensibly to improve her health. A relationship that had evolved from what began as friendly conversation into something considerably more serious over the 5 months preceding my discovery. I filed for divorce within the following weeks, and our proceedings have been relatively straightforward given the clear, direct nature of how I discovered the affair, though the emotional process of processing both the affair itself and the specific method I used to confirm my suspicions, essentially setting up my own wife to potentially be caught, has required considerable personal reflection regarding whether this approach, while ultimately confirming a truth I needed to know, represented the healthiest way I could have addressed my growing concerns. I have found myself, in the months since, working through this experience with a therapist specifically focused on processing both the betrayal itself and my own complicated feelings about the deliberate, somewhat elaborate method I chose to confirm what I had already begun to suspect, ultimately concluding that while I do not regret learning the truth, I wish circumstances had allowed for a more direct conversation rather than requiring this kind of elaborate verification before I felt confident enough in my suspicions to actually address them directly. David designed his own test to confirm what he already suspected. Our final story tonight, Story 5, is about a discovery that required no test at all, because the truth arrived, completely unprompted, through someone who had absolutely no reason to reveal it. This is the last story. Here is what happened. My name is Amanda. I am 40 years old. I live in Orlando, Florida, and 6 months ago I discovered my husband's affair when the husband of the woman he was involved with contacted me directly, having discovered his own wife's infidelity independently and, upon learning her affair partner was married, made the decision to reach out to me directly with comprehensive evidence, believing I deserved to know the truth regardless of how personally difficult this situation had become for both of our respective marriages. My husband's name is Kevin, and we had been married for 15 years, and I want to describe the specific circumstances of this contact. Receiving a message from a man I had never met, introducing himself carefully and explaining that he had recently discovered his own wife's affair, providing enough specific details about dates, locations, and circumstances that made immediately clear he was not mistaken about the fundamental situation, even before I had any opportunity to independently verify what he was telling me. I want to describe the specific evidence this man provided, including screenshots of messages between our respective spouses that left no ambiguity about the nature and duration of their relationship, along with hotel receipts and other documentation he had gathered during his own investigation into his wife's behavior, evidence that collectively revealed Kevin and this man's wife had been involved in an affair spanning approximately 2 years, conducted with what appeared to be considerable care and planning to avoid detection by either of us throughout this extended period. I want to describe what it felt like to receive this comprehensive evidence from a complete stranger, someone experiencing his own parallel betrayal, reaching out specifically because he believed I deserved the same clarity and truth he had eventually discovered about his own marriage, rather than continuing to allow me to remain unknowingly deceived while he processed his own situation privately. I want to describe the conversation I had with this man before confronting Kevin directly, spending considerable time understanding the complete scope of what he had discovered, recognizing that his own experience closely paralleled what I was now learning about my own marriage, both of us having remained genuinely unaware of our spouse's extended affair with each other throughout 2 full years of what we had each believed represented stable, faithful marriages. Update: 4 months later. I confronted Kevin with the comprehensive evidence this man had provided, and Kevin's acknowledgement came relatively quickly given the specific, undeniable nature of what I was presenting, confirming the affair had indeed been ongoing for approximately 2 years as the evidence suggested. I filed for divorce within the following month, and Kevin has since moved out, our divorce proceeding through what has been a relatively straightforward legal process given the clear documentation available regarding both the affair's duration and various financial implications that emerged during the settlement process. I have maintained occasional contact with the man who originally reached out to me, both of us navigating our respective divorces somewhat in parallel given how closely connected our situations turned out to be, finding, somewhat unexpectedly, a genuine source of mutual understanding and support in someone who experienced almost exactly the same betrayal I did, discovered through the same 2-year relationship between our respective spouses, a connection that has provided unexpected comfort during what remains one of the most difficult periods of my adult life. That's all 5 stories tonight. If any of these hit close to home, let me know in the comments below. If you want more stories like this, every single day, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. A like helps YouTube show this to more people who might need to hear tonight. Thank you for watching.